students are dumping elite colleges and heading south. That's according to an article published by the Free Press. Top-tier universities such as Brown and Harvard say application numbers dipped this year by 5% and 3%, respectively. Public schools in the South, meanwhile, saw a 62% increase in applicants, which is more than double the same for the North. And Southern colleges have seen a surge of applicants from out-of-state students. For example, in 2023, about 19% of Clemson enrollment came from New York and New Jersey, a major change from 2017 when the top out-of-staters were from Georgia and the Carolinas. The reasons are numbered. Everything from soaring Ivy League prices, weather, sports, COVID restrictions, or perhaps progressive policies.
Some prospective students are beginning to question whether it's all worth it anyway. A 2023 study by a Dartmouth professor found a staggering 11% of Fortune 500 CEOs have an Ivy League education, but students are also looking for alternative options like trade schools. And that figure, 11% of Fortune 500 CEOs, has been cited as, only 11% are from Ivy League schools. But when we consider the reality that 8 of America's colleges are Ivy League institutions, and there are 5,999 colleges in the United States of America, we've got 15,000 students in Ivy League schools and a total of 18.5 plus million college students in the United States. This is actually really outsized representation of Ivy League students that are CEOs today. So interesting that statistic's kind of been thrown around. That's my Ivy League education at work. That's where I learned how to do statistics. But it's actually crazy because Ivy League schools make up 0.0013% of all schools. And students make up 0.0008% of all students. So a lot of them are becoming CEOs, but I don't think every student today goes to college aspiring to be a CEO. Maybe they aspire to own the company instead, start something new, or pursue a different passion, not in the business world. I would actually credit, this year's low applications to test scores being required again after students may be banking on them not being required because they hadn't been for so many years. And I don't know if that's contributing to this. I can imagine a world where it would, because, you have a lot of students that if they don't believe that's going to be the number one criteria, they don't invest a lot of time into studying for that. And then their test scores look a little bit more like what's expected of public universities in the South rather than Ivy League institutions. And it's a lot of time spent getting into a school, interviewing, gathering all of your application materials, writing a customized essay, and it might be a calculation they make where they say, actually, this is a better use of my time. I'm more likely to get in somewhere else.
Yeah, it could be. I also just, anecdotally talking to young people in my family who are graduating soon and kind of deciding what they want to do and where they want to go to college. A lot of them just express that they kind of want a normal college experience. They want to go somewhere that has great sports teams. They want a good Greek life. They want to go somewhere where it's sunny and the weather's nice. And they just want that sort of movie-esque experience that they see of a large state school. And they kind of view the Ivy League as a bit dour, maybe really oriented around activism now, and they just want that normal college experience. So I think that's part of it as well. We brought up the COVID question earlier as well, and I could imagine that being a part of it. I know a lot of the schools in the Northeast had really strict COVID restrictions, whereas some of the public schools down south did not. And there are students now who, if you go to USC, right, you not only had, obviously not a Northeastern school, but I think demonstrative of the point, which is you might have never had basically a normal graduation. If you were a senior in high school, your graduation was canceled maybe because of COVID. Then you go to USC and you either have to quarantine in your dorm or wear a mask to all of your classes, and you have to abide by a vaccine mandate. And then you get to your senior year and your graduation is canceled because the administrators are worried that the valedictorian is going to make her speech about Palestine instead of the graduation, and they preemptively cancel her. That's not a normal college experience by any measure. And I think people just really wanted to be able to go to class without wearing a mask. They didn't want to have to get a booster shot to be able to be on campus. I know Georgetown, where I went to school, I couldn't hack it in the Ivy League. You know how it is. But they had a vaccine requirement actually for their homecoming and for the class reunion. So when I hit my 5-year class reunion, I couldn't go because I didn't have the right vaccine at the time under the COVID policy, which I thought was pretty ridiculous. And so I think that that's probably something that young people are thinking about too. They know that they're the least susceptible to severe COVID side effects. They're the least susceptible to dying from COVID, and they probably feel like these restrictions are a little bit silly. I know that was sort of the consensus, at least from students that I talked to who had to go through these policies. They were really quite frustrated that it was interfering with their college experience for something that was likely not going to have a great effect on their life or their health.
Absolutely, yeah. I think what we saw with the rise of college tuition, it was in part because we were in a time of recession in 2008. A lot of people wanted to shelter and not join the economy yet because it was a really unfavorable job market. And there was also this narrative that if you want to have a good life, you have to go to school. You have to continue your education, go on to undergraduate and maybe even graduate studies to get some of these good jobs with higher pay. And I really think that market of, quote unquote, skilled employees, but really, someone with a college degree, that there was such a huge pool of them that no longer was it the case that a college degree guaranteed you a six-figure salary or, would bring you to the upper middle class. And so I think people are realizing that, yes, college is good. Continuing education is good. It helps you become maybe a well-rounded person. You get to, spend time living away from family in kind of an insulated setting where if you don't pay the bills, you're not out on the streets. And maybe you can go home to mom and dad, or you're in the dorm rooms and everything's sorted out in advance and you can take out loans to pay for it and worry about the finances later. There's some nice aspects of that, to have some more time to grow and figure out who you are as a person before you're launched out into the very unforgiving economy and world. But I think a lot of people are realizing that, maybe going to a public university is good because you get the college experience, you get to learn some more stuff. Maybe you even get to learn a trade at some of these schools that's becoming increasingly popular. But I think there's a lot of people who don't see it as worth the cost whatsoever, even in scenarios where, in the Ivy League schools, if you're lower income, they cover your tuition directly. And so that's a really good policy that makes sure that we don't have talent left behind simply due to the high cost of education. But I think also people just enjoy working with their hands. They're totally fine, getting up and putting long hours in because they want to be outside. They want to do work with their hands and they prefer it to the kind of jobs you get after, getting an education and a degree. And so I think we're in a period where we're correcting from some of that overcorrection of, oh my gosh, we all need more schooling. And now we're in a period where people are like, yeah, it's okay. And you can get a really good high paying job right now if you're a welder, if you're a truck driver, because we're seeing a lot of trades and a lot of craftsmen, high skilled, but manual labor requiring more workers.
Yeah, it's an important point. There has been this sort of backlash towards the idea that everybody needs to go to college in order to be economically successful. And that way of thinking in the late 90s until very recently helped lead to the devaluation of college degrees because so many people were going, colleges were jacking up tuition, and a lot of people weren't graduating with the skills that they actually needed in order to contribute to the workforce. A big part of my college education was just the network that I made and created there, and I ended up, getting a degree in government and economics, which is helpful for journalism, but obviously not directly related. Everything that I learned about journalism, I learned on the job through, my first fellowship and my first job out of college. And I think that's the case for a lot of college graduates where they end up getting degrees that don't directly relate to the field that they're entering. And it's like, why did I just spend however much money in 4 years, or for some people 5 years, if you go through a graduate degree even more, why did I spend all of this time and money learning all of these concepts that might be generally useful from a personal enrichment standpoint, but maybe didn't help me too much in terms of being able to contribute well to the workforce and being able to contribute to the career path that I ended up taking. And one of the things I really appreciated, I was at Cornell earlier this week moderating a debate for the Steamboat Institute, And I know Cornell kind of gets a bad rap as being one of the lower tier Ivies, but what I really appreciated is that they actually have very skills-oriented programs on campus. They have an agriculture program, they have a veterinary program, they have a hotel program. Apparently Marriott hires almost all of their employees from Cornell graduating classes from the hotel program, which I thought was really neat and really something different from what we see in a lot of liberal arts-oriented educations nowadays, where people are consuming a lot of literature or consuming a lot of scientific theory, but maybe not getting those hands-on skills that are actually useful for when they enter the workforce. And your point about low-income students is well taken too. I was a first-generation college grad, and Georgetown has an amazing program where they actually reimburse you for federal loans that you take out. So I ended up graduating with pretty minimal student debt. If you're a middle class or upper middle class person, you have to deal with the calculation that you could end up graduating with hundreds of thousands of dollars in student debt. And for some people, that's starting to seem like not the best trade-off for the education that they're receiving, especially when we see now the student loan debt crisis and the fact that interest has compiled on people to the point where they maybe have $300,000 to $400,000 outstanding. Even $50,000 is something that could delay you deciding to have a family or buy a home. And that's something that people need to consider before they decide to go to one of these really expensive colleges, and a reason why they might decide to either forego college altogether or go down to one of these southern state schools and maybe have some fun, meet some cool people, and pay a lot less for a still very decent education.
Yeah, I will say, I think about the path not being straight to people getting to the job they really want and have passion around doing. I went to trade school before I went to college and didn't think I would ever go to college. I was in an agricultural trade school and was in the FFA and was on that path, but hated biology, was awful at biology, which is really essential if you want to go into agriculture. It just, it wasn't for me. I loved being in the greenhouse. I loved being with the animals, but ultimately, I ended up getting actually guilted in by my best friend to join the debate and mock trial team, and that's kind of what got me on the path into more political science, law, international studies oriented stuff. Got really lucky that I got a leadership scholarship thanks to public speaking with the FFA, actually, that led me on a path to actually go to college. It definitely wasn't straight, but I don't regret anything. And I think there might be some people that look at the waste of money, of resources, of time, and students going to college and then trade school, or college and then doing something completely different from their field, skills that they learned in the workforce, and saying, I shouldn't have gotten that college degree at all. Of course, it's not efficient, but the alternative is not realistic. To have our workforce staying in the first choice job they had when they were a teenager and spending most of their lives miserable, they're also not going to be very good workers. So how efficient would it be if we were to say, you have one choice and that's it, no other options? I think having this calculation of, you can only do one thing and follow a straight path, it's just not realistic when we think about human behavior in general. Most people are not rational decision makers in the economy, as a lot of economists would like to believe. And so I think in being real about that, it's actually good that people end up on a path that's right for them, that they enjoy. They'll do better work and be more productive, and it will be better for the economy at the end of the day. But I think the prohibitively high cost without an addition of value by universities and colleges, when we think about tuition, it's unnecessary. That is wasteful, and that definitely needs to be corrected so people can have a more flexible path and become, good workers and contribute to society and also be happy. I think that's reasonable to want.
We're going to take a break and be back. More Rising after this.